Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. Mark, thank you for accepting our invite to be here today, present this incredible subject that is really something that about. It's very interesting when we have opportunity to talk about the past because then we realize that many things that happen today in the present have historic origin, and although we don't used to think about the past, how these things were used to be done in the past, we see that this is more natural than we could imagine. So it will be great to talk to you today, learn a little bit about how crypto have been used in the history, the evolution of the machines. And as I told you yesterday, we develop a privileged access management, and crypto is the core part of our technology. So it will be very great to learn about the history of these machines and have you here today. We have about 50 people in our audience, and let's start.
Okay,
Welcome.
very good. Yeah, thank you so much for having me and letting me give this interesting talk. One of my passions is collecting these old machines. So Marcus, I'm like you. I see your collection behind you there. I have a similar collection, and understanding the history that has gone before us helps us understand what we're up to today. So let me go ahead and share the screen, and let's make sure everything is working here. Okay, you can tell me, is that shared properly? I think it is. So what I'm going to talk about for maybe the next 30 to 40 minutes or so is an interesting problem that was uncovered back in 2015. So about 6 years ago, this came to light. There had been a theory all along that here in the United States, our national security agency, the NSA, had figured out a way to create what we like to call a backdoor into these encryption devices. It had only been a theory, nobody could prove it. But in 2015, some documents that were classified were made unclassified by the NSA. And inside of those documents revealed all the information that people had been looking for. So I will get back to all those documents in just a moment, but let me talk a little bit about how we got to where we are today. So I'll go a little bit through the history of mechanical encryption devices, the machines that people were using before we had computers that we do today. I'll talk a little bit about Boris Hagelin. He was a gentleman from Sweden who eventually moved to Switzerland during World War II and was the father of many of these machines, and was part of this plot to create the backdoors in them. An agreement he had, what we call the gentleman's agreement with the NSA, and then what we've learned about what was going on. And of course, I'll wrap it up with the rest of the story because there's been some breaking news that has happened just in the past year that's even beyond what we will cover here. As Marcus knows, this is a talk I gave at the RSA conference 2 years ago. And so 2 years ago would have been 2019. And at that point, it was 4 years after the NSA papers had come out. But it was before we heard a whole nother revelation. And I'll get to that at the very end of this because the story continues even beyond what I'm going to show you today. It's fascinating what's been going on. So if we go way, way back in the history of protecting messages, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, others all had the common problem of how do you communicate between a leader and military forces, or between the emperor and the military leaders or whomever. How do you communicate securely so I can send a message from one person to another person, and somebody along the way, if they intercepted the message, they would not understand it. So we know that some of the earlier methods were literally strips of leather that had letters engraved into it, and you wrap it around a stick and you could decode the message. We also had things called the Caesar cipher, which was shifting letters. I'll talk about that in a moment. Mechanical devices like wheels and slide bars, they came into play in the 1700s and the 1800s. So as the Industrial Revolution began going, we begin to see the emergence of these mechanical devices that can help us with protecting messages. So they all worked pretty much the same way. They're just substituting letters in the alphabet. So if you imagine laying out all 26 letters of the alphabet, maybe do it twice, an upper row and a lower row, and then you move it, just kind of shift it to the left or to the right. Again, that's what a Caesar shift did. In Roman times, they would move it 3 letters over. It was not, I mean, the encryption today, you'd think that was pretty easy to crack. But in Roman times, 2,000 years ago, when most people did not know how to read, if they saw a message that was enciphered this way, they wouldn't understand what the message meant. You can also do transposition, where we move letters around, where the letter stays the same, we just put it in a different location in the message. And pretty much all encryption works the same way today, even computer-based encryption. If you're using DES or AES or any of the many types of encryption algorithms, they all work the same way. It's substitution and transposition are the 2 methods that are combined together, except now we do it with computers. So everything was fine. As telegraph came along and we wanted to move messages a little bit faster, the method for converting a plain text message into ciphertext had to speed up a little bit. But the little machines, the handheld machines, were pretty much all we needed. Sometimes they were made out of paper, little discs that you could rotate. And that was fine, because the amount of effort it took to crack the message was much, much longer than the value of the message. So it might take days or weeks to crack through a message, but by then it didn't matter because the value was long gone. What you see there on the slide, that round looking thing, is from the American Civil War from the 1960s. That was a cipher machine used by the Union, or the Northern Army here in the US. There are replicas of that machine available now. They're kind of neat. It's just a little drum with the alphabet put across it, and you just rotate the drum and somebody writes down the letters of the message. So again, this was fine, as long as there was just telegraph. Businesses at the time were also in need of encryption. The concern was that if I have a message, I'm going to send it over the telegraph lines. The telegraph operators would be able to read my business message, and they would know what I'm up to. Am I buying something? Am I doing a deal? And they might tip my competition and tell them about what's going on. So what you're looking at here is a device from France from the 1920s. This was called the Sphinx. It was very popular. You could keep it in your pocket, and it had little bars on it with the alphabet, and you use those wheels that you can see there to slide the bars back and forth. It was very easy to encrypt a message, very easy to decrypt it, and but if you had the message itself and not the device, it was very hard to crack. So this was good, good enough through World War I and into the 1920s. But as radio started to come of age during World War I, and we needed to move messages faster, and now across radio where anybody could listen to it, there was a desire to come up with an even better way to do encryption. And so by this point, by the 1920s, typewriters were already in use. I've noticed the one over Marcus's shoulder there, that old typewriter from the 1800s. They were very common in these days. And so in 1917, 1918, 1919, there was a series of inventions. This was right after World War I, where they took common typewriters, converted them over to where if you type in a letter, the output would be encrypted. And so it's a neat idea. And in some cases, it would just be a light bulb that would light up and somebody had to write it down. In other cases, it would actually print the encrypted message onto a piece of paper. But they all worked pretty much the same way in terms of substitution and transposition, the same basic principles as before. And of course, everybody is familiar with the Enigma machine. This was made famous by the Germans during World War II. It was invented in 1919. It was used by businesses through the 1920s. and was even used here in the western part of the world. In South America and North America, businesses were using Enigma machines. They were using them in Europe. But when the Nazis came to power in 1933, they adopted the Enigma for military use and banned the sale of these devices to anybody outside of Germany. So if you're collecting these devices, and there are a few around, trying to find one from the 1920s that was used by businesses is extremely rare. They only exist in museums, but they're fun to see. And there are a few of them around. Now, I can do a completely other talk for you if you'd like on the Enigma machine. That's not what we're here today to talk about, but they did use the Enigmas even after World War II, all the way into the 1960s, because the Germans, the Nazis, were convinced that they had never been cracked. We also convinced the Soviets that we did not know how to crack the Enigma. And we convinced the German military and the German government after World War II to continue using them. That way we could continue to read their messages. And so it's an interesting, little follow-on story to what happened in World War II. But I could do a whole nother talk on that some other day maybe. What I want to talk about today is a different group, a company called Crypto AG. This company is out of Switzerland. They just went out of business about 2 years ago, and I'll explain to you why here in a few minutes. But their history got started with a gentleman named Boris Hagelin. Boris was from Sweden, and he was a mechanical engineer, also got involved in building cipher devices in the early 1920s, and began to market his devices in Sweden, and began to be very popular as a competition for the Enigma machine. So during World War II, he worked out of Sweden. After World War II, they moved the company to Switzerland, which is where they were until they went out of business just a couple of years ago. The devices that they were building, the model numbers, most of them started with the letter C, which stood for crypto. And then there was a number like the C35 or the C52. Generally, that was the year that it was developed. We'll talk about the C52 and the CX52 in just a moment. They were developed in the year 1952. So the reason this is kind of important, if you look at the machine on the left, this was Hagelin's B21. So again, 1921, very similar to the Enigma machine on the right. And again, competing with each other. But on the inside, it was a different technology. So the Enigma machine, the way it worked was a series of rotors, and electricity passed through the rotors, and it stepped. Each time you pressed a key, the rotors would line up a little bit differently, and a light bulb would light up. And so you had a fairly predictable motion. The B21, though, was a little different. It had wheels, coding wheels, that created a 5x5 matrix. And so it used a different approach from the Enigma, and it actually made it a little harder to decipher. But they were prone to breaking a lot. It had a mechanical problem. It required a lot of maintenance, whereas the Enigma machines were fairly maintenance-free. They ran very well if you kept them properly oiled. So this was kind of a trade-off where you had really good encryption, but the machines didn't always work, versus encryption that was not quite as good, but the machines were very reliable. So the Germans wound up going with the Enigma machines, but others continue using the Hagelin machines. Ultimately, he started to develop a different approach, and there we go. And that was to move to what's called pin and lug mechanisms. So you can see the video that's moving there, the upper right, that's an M209 machine. And the way it worked, you would align the rotors up for the letter that you wanted, and you rotate the little knob on the right, and it would print the enciphered letter onto a strip of paper. The Enigma machine, you see that on the bottom, the person's finger is just pushing the same key over and over, but you can see a different light bulb is lighting up each time because as the rotors are moving. So again, two different approaches towards doing encipherment. Both had advantages. both had disadvantages, but they were competing with each other to make that work. So as the Hagelin Corporate or Crypto AG began to grow, many new devices came out, the C35, 36, 38. Again, this is 1935, 1936, 1938. The C38 was adopted by the United States military in the late 1930s, was known as the M209. This device, we recognized, the United States recognized that it could be cracked. In other words, we knew how to break the codes, we knew the math behind it, but we also understood that it would take several hours to do that cracking of the code, and that was okay for battlefield use. So we actually used the M209 all the way through the 1970s, through the Vietnam War. That was used for very low-level military units and used very successfully. So up to this point, the US intelligence was not too worried about the Hagelin machines because they understood how to break them. Same thing with Enigma. Once they figured out how to break them, how to read the messages and decipher them, that was okay. But in 1952, a brand new machine came along called the C52 that Boris Hagelin's company developed. This one was hard to crack. This one was a new generation of machines. It was designed to be very, very difficult for anybody to break. And it absolutely concerned the NSA here in the United States because they knew they would not be able to read these messages. And so this is where our story is about to take us, is that there's this desire to work with Crypto AG to make sure that any machines that they were producing after this point could still be cracked by the NSA, a very secret arrangement that was worked out in the early 1950s. So the gentleman behind this was William Friedman, an American who was part of the Signal Intelligence Service in the 1930s. He was also married to another cryptographer, Elizabeth Friedman. Both of them worked for the National Security Agency, for NSA. Both were very well known in the cryptographic communities. Very well published, lots of books, unclassified things that they produced. And he was more or less the father of all of today's modern cryptographic efforts, things the NSA does today, is what William Friedman had come up with. He is the guy who was very concerned when they found out what Crypto AG was doing with the C52, very concerned about it, and literally flew over to meet with Boris Hagelin and created a secret agreement to work out a way to make sure their devices could be read by the NSA. Again, this was all top secret. There were rumors surrounding this, but nobody could prove that it would happen. This began to change when William Friedman died in 1969. His personal papers were donated to a foundation. What they didn't realize was his personal papers contained all of the evidence of the secret arrangement, the gentleman's agreement. And it sat at the Marshall Foundation for a number of years, and nobody knew it was there until some researchers started going through it and began to uncover all of this evidence because it was all unclassified and just sitting in a library. So NSA found out that these papers were available. They asked in 1976, just a few years later, that the papers be sequestered, in other words, taken away from the public because it contained too much sensitive information, which they did. But in the late 70s, early 80s, they reopened the files to let researchers look through it. Now, they did not realize what was there. The people at the NSA knew what was going on, but at the library, they didn't know how much information were in these papers that were left behind. There was a book written, some of you may have heard of it, called The Puzzle Palace, that came out in the early 80s. It was a book all about the NSA, and it made references to this Boris project. Although the author of the book did not have all the details, didn't really know what was going on, but he did refer to it, so there is some early evidence. But in 2015, and this is what I was mentioning earlier, NSA decided to release all of the collection, just go ahead and put it out, make it available for everybody to see. But before they did that, they had some of their own staff go through 52,000 pages to make sure that nothing in there was still classified. In other words, do what's called redaction. So what happens there is we go through in the redaction process, they'll take a classified document and they'll cover up anything that they feel is still classified, it's still a secret, and they'll reveal the things that they feel are unclassified. Well, in this case, again, 52,000 pages, it took about 2 years, but it was not all done by the same person. And this is an interesting problem. Several people were working on reviewing these papers, and because you have individuals doing it, they're making their own decision about what to reveal. And here's what happened. One of the documents that was inside of the library of William Friedman, there were 3 copies of it. There was an initial draft that he had given to his secretary, handwritten draft to be typed up. And then there were 2 further copies, and the copies were all numbered, but there were 3 copies of the same document. But 3 different individuals went through to do the redaction. And here's what happened. This is the cover page as they started going through it. You go a little further into the document and you can see the same page on the left. The person who reviewed that page did not find anything classified. The person who did the same page in the middle decided that the bottom paragraph needed to be covered up, felt it was classified. The person who did the page on the right decided that 4 parts of it needed to be classified. So you have a mistake here where they think that they're covering up classified information, but in fact, one of the documents reveals everything. Now, this is an interesting problem because now we can see what they thought was sensitive and what needed to be covered up and what is not. These documents are still available today. You can do this research yourself. You can go to the archives and look at all 52,000 of these pages, and you can see these same types of mistakes. So here's a few more examples. You can see where we had on the left and in the middle, no redaction at all. On the right, that third person decided a good deal of it needed to be covered up. Here's an example where we do have parts that are completely covered. So there are some parts of these documents we don't know what's completely inside, but most of it has been revealed. Here's another example where we have things that were covered up and shouldn't have been, and so forth. So you can see where this takes us. And where I got into this, the reason I found this is being a collector of these devices, I came across what's called a T52. So this is a very large encryption device. It was designed for teletypewriters, and you connect it up to a teletype machine, and anything that you're typing into the teletype machine would be encrypted first by this machine, and then it goes to the teletype and off through the wires. On the other end, a similar machine would de-encrypt it and then print it on the teletype machine. I was trying to find some documents on it, and that's where I uncovered these 2015 documents because they kept referring to this T52 device. That's what caused me I uncovered these documents that had the different redactions done incorrectly. And I actually called NSA. I said, you realize you've got documents out here that reveal top secret information? They said, yeah, unfortunately, we know about it. In fact, the BBC had already found it just a few days after we released it, and they did a big story. So you can read a little bit about this from the BBC from 6 years ago as they did a story. But that story didn't get a lot of interest. It was out maybe for a day or two, and then it lost the headline off of that. But they didn't have all the facts at that point either. But it's an interesting story into what they knew. So here's what was going on. Here was the problem that they were facing. So again, William Friedman, United States, NSA, big cryptographer, Boris Hagelin, the guy who started Crypto AG, building machines over in Switzerland. The new machine, this CX52 and the TC55, the teletype machine, big concern to the NSA. because of what they were going to be. They couldn't be solved. In other words, NSA's own capability for deciphering encrypted messages, they couldn't do it with these new machines. So Friedman went over and met with Hagelin. They came to an agreement, and they asked Crypto AG, please do not sell these new devices until the NSA could give you some new guidance on what to do with them. And what they meant by that is they literally, NSA printed new documents that showed you how to use the new machine in a way that was not so secure. Kind of a neat approach to it. And they had another set of documents that was for how to use it in a very secure manner. I'll get back to those in just a moment. But here's what they came up with. So I mentioned the M209 C38. This was already out, and NSA knew how to crack it. They knew that the Russians knew how to crack it, and they said, okay, fine. Any non-NATO country you can sell this to without any issue. The C446, which was built in 1946, was okay to sell. But the CX52, the machine that was unsolvable, not okay. The C52, without the X in it, they could sell that to non-NATO, but the CX could only go to NATO countries because it was built so well. So this agreement that says let's don't sell any of these became formalized in 1955. It was for a short delay, but after a while they formalized it. And they said essentially NSA developed instructions that NATO countries would use that made very, very strong encryption. And they developed a set of instructions for non-NATO countries. Now, for those of us that are collecting these devices and researching it, one of the things we've been trying to figure out is the difference in these instructions. And so we've been actually looking for the instructions, trying to find them. There's a gentleman in California who's had some success in finding two different documents, the manuals that came with these machines. Marcus, did your machine come with any instructions? Did it come with an instruction booklet? No?
No.
Okay. Yeah, it would be interesting if it did to see which one. You know, did it come with the one that would tell you how to do strong encryption, or did it come with the one that for weak encryption? And there's the only way you know is there's a little bit of text that's different. I think it's on page 6 or page 7 of that document. Very hard to find. You have to know what you're looking for, but that was the key piece there. That if you followed the weak instructions, the NSA could read the messages. If you followed the strong instructions, they couldn't.
So I will need to change my methods, right?
What's that?
I will need to change my methods to write mails and crypto, right?
That's right. That's right. Be very, very careful, right? So it was an interesting way of doing it. It's not a true backdoor per se, but it was a way of making sure they could read it. Newer devices that came along after the CX52, the NSA cryptographers actually would design them. They gave the design to Crypto AG, and Crypto AG would build them. So later devices actually had these weaknesses built in. So it wasn't just in the documentation. It was done up, designed by the NSA and built by Crypto AG. And this went on for several decades. And the countries buying these devices worldwide thought they were buying very, very secure devices, but didn't realize that they had this weakness built into it so that the NSA could monitor what they're talking about. So they, in summary, they, continue to sell these devices to countries that they felt, that they needed to intercept what was going on. The strong ones went to the friendly countries. There were some other family arrangements that were made with Boris Hagelin about making money selling his devices inside the United States, taking care of his son-in-law, and some other little family things. This all came out of those documents as well. So I think actually this would make a wonderful movie. If Hollywood would ever get a hold of all this information, they could make a really neat spy thriller. Because the story continues. It's not just in the 1950s. Well, it turns out that Iran was purchasing these machines. Israel was purchasing these machines. Egypt was purchasing them. Lots and lots of countries. it turns out that Israel knew what was going on, knew about the secret deal, and disclosed it to the Russians. The Russians probably had already knew about it because we had spies here in the United States. Oliver James and Robert Hansen were probably already telling our enemies about this backdoor that was in there. As late as the 1990s, the Iranians were still using these devices. We were still reading their messages in the 1990s. And when their prime minister was assassinated, we were intercepting their messages, wanting to know, is he dead? Has he been assassinated? So this was, 40 years later. We were still encouraging countries to use these devices because our intelligence services could intercept and read what was going on. This started to come to light in 1992. A gentleman from Germany who was a sales representative for Crypto AG, he was working in Iran selling the devices. And the Iranians found out from the Russians that the devices had a backdoor. They arrested this guy, Bueller, locked him up, accused him for spying. He knew nothing. He knew absolutely nothing. He was just a sales representative and had no idea of the secret agreements and arrangements and so forth. Eventually, they were able to pay a ransom and get him back to Germany. And at the time, he wrote a book about it. You can read the book. It's in German, but it's available online. It's a fascinating story about what happened. And Boris Hagelin at the time, again, denied anything was going on, but in those Friedman papers that came out later, this again was all revealed as being truthful. So eventually Crypto AG was faced with bankruptcy as the word starts getting out through the 1990s and so forth. They go under. There was an investor named Mark Rich who bailed it out, that he was well connected to Israel and to the Mossad. He gave them a lot of money to keep them alive. He was eventually arrested and charged with other crimes, was eventually pardoned from the White House. So it's got some connections back here to America. But the true rest of the story, and this is where I'll kind of wrap this up, this came out last year. So remember, when I did this talk, when I presented it at RSA, it was 2 years ago in the spring of 2019. And it was based on the revelations from NSA in 2015, 4 years earlier. What I did not know was that there was a whole nother effort underway at that point, investigating a similar but different scheme that had been going on. And you can read about this now. It's in the Washington Post and in several sources, published a little over a year ago. And essentially what happened here was called Operation Rubicon. And I've got to do some more digging into this. It will make a whole nother story to talk about. But beginning with that gentleman's agreement in the 1950s, the American CIA and the German BND, that's the Germans' equivalent of our CIA here, they got together and they talked to Crypto AG in the 1970s and paid them an enormous amount of money to continue building these devices. So NSA stepped out of the picture, and actually CIA and BND got involved. And at some point, they nearly owned Crypto AG. They had invested so much money in it. Nobody knew. The customers of Crypto AG were buying their devices, not realizing that the CIA and the BND were working together to make sure the devices all were solvable, all could be cracked, all had backdoors built into it. This continued until 2018, so just 3 years ago, this operation. And somebody inside of one of the agencies called the news companies and said, "I've got a story that you're not going to believe." And so they started investigating, and there are classified documents. Most of them are history documents that the CIA and the BND has. The news agencies were able to get a hold of them in their articles, which you can read online. I've got 2 links to it there, and you'll get a copy of the slide deck, so that there's no problem there. You can look this up. But I encourage you now, if you want to know more about the story, more about what was going on, the Cold War essentially continued well beyond the end of the Cold War in 1990. continued all the way up to 2018, just 3 years ago, is when this operation stopped. So this has been ongoing, probably continues today in terms of electronic communications. In fact, just this past week, I'm sure everybody has heard of the Pegasus story that broke back on Monday or Tuesday that has to do with the Apple iPhones and a company out of Israel that has developed a tool to put listening software onto your iPhone with no user permission. So this continues. This is not just Cold War spy and dagger, but even something that's going on today. So credits, of course, is a lot of the information that was that I found for this talk came from the National Archives, from the BBC. These are all resources. If you're interested in the history of cipher devices, it's a place to go to look at it. So I'm pretty much done talking. I'm happy now to take questions if anybody has any. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to walk you through some of this old history, and what is old is still new and very little has changed, but here we are. So let me turn off slide sharing and we'll go into question and answer if you'd like.
Right. Great, Marcus. Really, really interesting story. And it's really cool to know all these secret histories that have come public. And well, I'm sure we're going to have a few questions, but I would like to start with one first while we are collecting the questions from another our friend here. Please send the questions to the chat, please, right? Or maybe Thais can help us with some questions. But as as we see this history, it seems to be very active, right? So I believe the same kind of schema or the same kind of process happened today with another vendors from not for mechanical machines, but all kinds of cryptographic technologies. Do you think this still happens? So and maybe after his noting, this became more popular again about the capability of the U.S. government to interfere in private companies. But do you think this is still an issue that happens today?
Yes, absolutely. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, with the revelation of Pegasus that came out on Monday, it's a problem we face. It's a real problem. We're all adults here. When you have terrorist groups, criminal groups, others that are using very, very good encryption to protect their messages, those who are doing investigations, law enforcement and others, want to be able to intercept and listen to what they're talking about. So it's a real problem. The devices we have today, your iPhone, your Android, regular, here's my telephone here. This has more encryption in it than the Enigma machine or any of these others could possibly have. And it's a really, really good device, but it's frustrating for law enforcement because they can't intercept messages of criminals. So every country has different laws. Some countries require that the encryption that you use in there have a backdoor to it. That's by national law. Other countries ban it, will not allow their law enforcement to look into it. So I don't know in Brazil what the laws are there. I know here in the United States, our law enforcement are not allowed to do that, but over in Europe they are, and in India they are. Definitely China and Russia, they are. So they monitor everything. So in order for those countries, it's all the same technology. We're using the same stuff worldwide. So if in China and Russia, if they're able to intercept and read your messages, the technology they would use to do that is available in other countries as well. So it's a tough question because those of us as private citizens, we would like to have private communications, but we also want our governments to be able to do their job and intercept criminal behavior, terrorists, and so forth. So there's a tension there. But yeah, there certainly is a lot of effort between the governments and the manufacturers of encryption devices, to work together. And so it's a tough question, but I think, again, as mature adults, we have to realize that that's part of the game.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, And
Marcus, we already have a lot of questions from our audience. Let's start with them.
Okay. So I do see one there at the bottom. Do I personally have an Enigma machine? The answer is absolutely yes. My background image right here, I'm at the house. I'm just throwing up a bat. That is the Enigma that I own. In fact, I have two of them. So that one is a working functional Enigma machine, was made in 1938, survived the war. It was discovered in the 1980s in a warehouse in Germany. Missing a few parts, but still working. We think that it was being used as a spare parts Enigma. And so a gentleman who used to work on Enigma machines in the German army was able to restore it. And I have it here at my house and it works great. The other one was recovered just a few years ago in France. There was a fellow out metal detecting and could see that there was a big piece of metal in the ground, got out his shovel, dug it up, and here was an Enigma that had been buried for 80 years on the battlefield. It was buried in 1944, and I have it here at home. It took a little bit of work to clean it up, to get all the dirt out of it. It will not work. It's rusted and corroded, but it's a very good example of an Enigma that was thrown away in the middle of the battle, and shows a lot of damage, where they tried to destroy it before they buried it. So yeah, they're fun to collect. There's only about 350 Enigmas worldwide. Most of them are in museums, but a few are personally owned by individuals who collect them. So yeah, they're out there. They're hard to find, but they are there. So what other questions? I see some questions in Portuguese, so you'll have to translate those.
No, I'll translate everything for you. Don't worry. We had one more. Is there any affordable way for a lineman to encrypt our cell phone nowadays? How can we escape from espionage nowadays?
So I use a program called Signal. I'm sure you've heard of it. And there are others that are pretty good. Signal is an app. It runs on your iPhone or in your Android, and the people that are behind it they've built a very good piece of encryption. Law enforcement does not like it because it allows you to communicate very securely. Again, in some countries, the use of that technology is illegal, and so I have to be careful. Here in the United States, it's okay. In Brazil, I guess it's okay, but certainly in India and other countries, it may not be okay. So you have to check depending on, because I realize we have people here who are in different countries. You need to check and make sure that it's legal. Even if the software is out there, you can get in trouble if it's illegal to use it in your country. So this is a problem because every country has different laws. But again, we're all adults here, so we have to understand that countries have different approaches to privacy, and you just have to know what the laws are in your country before you use these tools.
Yes, and we have some more. What is your opinion? What do you think it's the government role in preventing attacks, critical attacks to our economic sector, as the colonial pipeline?
So this is an interesting problem. Ransomware, which is what hit Colonial Pipeline, is a criminal effort. So it's not an attack by a government. It's not like bombing a bridge or invading with air, sea, or land. We have a criminal group that launched criminal software and it hit a pipeline company. My understanding is that the Russian group behind this did not realize that they had shut down the pipeline. They thought they had only hit the business system and that they would get their big payout, several $1 million, and it would all be over. They didn't realize the big trouble they were causing by shutting down a pipeline. And so in this case, we're talking about criminal activity. And so we need the help of the Russians because that's where the criminal groups are. They're in Russia. And so we need the help of Russian law enforcement to go find these individuals and shut this stuff down. If this was coming from Brazil, I'm very certain the Brazil federal police, your law enforcement, would absolutely go and find these criminals and lock them up forever. Russia doesn't want to do that. It's kind of a crazy mindset where they tolerate and allow these criminal groups to behave the way they do. Many people think they're well connected to the government, and they're just as long as they don't touch businesses in Russia, and it's all done outside of Russia, it's okay. So when we say what is the government role, the key government here is the government of Russia that needs to get involved in it. There is very little that the government of Brazil or the government of the United States can do to stop crime coming from another country, other than assist that country in trying to track those criminals down. But to take it to the next level, now it again becomes a big question with protecting critical infrastructure. In many countries, the critical infrastructure is owned by private companies. It's not owned by the government. And so there has to be a good relationship between the government and the private sector in terms of working together for protection. Here in the United States, I think you have the same thing in Brazil. We have partnerships. We have agreements between governments and businesses to work together. Individuals work very closely. We do a lot of information sharing. So there is, a very high level of sharing and talking back and forth. But it still makes it hard if something happens to a critical infrastructure, if the lights go out or if gas doesn't flow, the finger always points to the government. Why didn't you stop this? And it's hard for the government to say, yes, but it's a private company. And in our country, we have arrangements for private businesses are allowed to run their business. It's not run by the government. And so we have to understand that. Do you want everything run by the government, or do you want to let businesses be businesses? So we have to recognize there are some weaknesses in that. And I think all of us agree we would rather let the businesses be businesses and let the government govern, but we kind of stay apart from each other. But a very good question.
Well, over the stop, Mark. So that's a concern. We keep thinking about it because we are part of the system. We provide cybersecurity technology for companies, and we have a lot of opportunities here to talk about it and see what is the impact of our technology, of our delivery to these companies, and what are this impact for the society in terms that what it represents for us to be responsible for protecting critical data from companies like telecommunications company, oil and gas.
Right.
So that's a very important concern, and we understand that we are part of protecting critical infrastructure that affects all the citizens. So it's really a main concern for us.
Yeah, and I think you probably understand this. In your role, your products are used to protect critical infrastructure. Your products then become a target for other nations that might be adversaries. We saw this with SolarWinds, for example. They were creating very good products that are used for monitoring systems where you can bring everything in one place, and they became a target for infiltration to gain access to government systems and whatnot. So your company could be targeted, by China, by Russia, by North Korea, Iran. I mean, there's lots of adversaries, and then use you as a method for gaining access to somebody else's network. It's just something you have to be aware of and be always on the lookout for, is somebody trying to use you as a way to get into the true target of where they're going. Any of us that are in the security world have to understand that we are pieces of a very large game, and we have to recognize that while you may have a super excellent product, the better you are at what you're doing, the more people that are using your product, the more likely you are to be a target. I mean, look at Microsoft. It's worldwide software. So Microsoft is a huge target for foreign countries to try and gain access into their products or services. Amazon is that way. Google is like that. I mean, you can, and so you guys, as well as other software companies, same thing, you become targets. So you just have to be aware of it and,
Yes.
and you know, keep up that vigilance, which I'm sure you're doing, but that's,
Yes, and we put a lot of efforts to make things safer as possible, and that's the main concern for us. We understand the role we play in this game, and as we have big number of companies in our territory that we manage to do the crypto things. So it's really important thing we're talking about to all our members understand how critical as what we do here, and
that's right.
it's
Yeah,
very
it's more, as you understand, it's more than just a business. It's more than just sales and numbers, but it's a very critical role that protects society, protects the infrastructures. And I think all you and all your employees take that very serious. Just never let down your guard. Always understand that adversary nations will target you. That's just a fact of life. And so as much as you're doing good product development, always be aware that somebody's trying to infiltrate, trying to get in, trying to steal your property, even potentially manipulate your code. That's a very real problem. You just have to have processes in place to detect it. So again, I point to SolarWinds as a great example. The adversary got into their system and changed their update software so that as updates went out, it contained malicious code. So if you're doing automatic updates to your customers, you have to make sure that those updates have not been poisoned, you know, because that's a new technology, a new trick now that countries are using. So it's just awareness and making sure that we're always watching for these things.
yes. And I believe it's become more with so many different companies. I think there's a lot of space, maybe more than we could have in the 50s, because there is a lot of companies creating new products very fast, being adopted in scale, growing very fast. So I think this will grow more and more. This kind of tactics and attacks will become more intense as well. We have a new products, new companies with low maturity in terms
That's
of
right.
the speed
That's
of
right.
innovation, demands of digital transformation is pushing a lot of new things that needs to be ready to run very fast. So it's a challenge, and it's really
It's a
a
huge
concern.
challenge. Yep. Yep. It certainly is.
And Thais, you have more questions?
We had some more questions, but let's get back just one moment to the machines because we had a lot of curiosities here. How much of this technology is still being used today? Do you know if any of those
Well,
technologies are still?
the mechanical machines, and I'm sorry if you hear my clock going off in the background. I don't know if you can hear that. It's telling me it's 9 o'clock. Can you hear that? Is it coming through?
Yes, but there's no problem because here in Brazil we have churches that sing the bells as well. It's just like yours.
Yeah, this is a grandfather clock that's directly behind. I should have turned it off. I'm sorry, I forgot. It'll be finished here in just a moment. There we go. Now it's done. Okay. So the mechanical devices they're all gone. They're now in museums, and you know they're curiosity pieces. And this is because the computers have all taken their places. I don't know of anybody that still uses mechanical encryption devices other than just for educational purposes. But the electronic ones, and they started appearing in the 1960s and 1970s, they also run the risk. We have to be very careful of who we buy them from. That they also, could have backdoors, could have things inside it. This has been one of the suspicions with the apps that you put on your phones. I'm sure you're familiar with TikTok, that comes out of China, as to while the app may be perfectly fine for social media, what else does it do? What does it have access to on your phone? And can it do things beyond what the app says? So it's a bigger problem than just encryption and encryption devices, but because everybody has a mobile phone and it's either iPhone or Android, those are your two popular, and everybody has these apps, do you trust the app? Do you know where it came from? Do you know what it does? And many of them have, you can fine tune the permissions, but how do you know if that's really what's working? If you tell it, do not access my microphone or my camera, how do you know it's really not accessing my microphone or camera? So again, as security professionals, I hope we're all very aware of these real problems, but most citizens have no idea. Our families, our friends, others around us, they just trust that it works. And I'm not saying don't use the phones. I mean, they're beautiful little devices, but just common sense and be aware of where things are coming from. Because this is, today in 2021, this is the problem, is the applications that we're putting onto our little devices, our personal devices. They're just as bad as 50 years ago with these mechanical devices that were not used by individual citizens, used by governments, but today everybody has the phones that they think are private. They think they're doing nothing but just providing me with a way to talk to my family, when in fact they may be doing a whole lot more that we're not aware of. So just be careful.
Okay, we will. And we have one more about the machines. They want to know, there in the US, do you have a group of people that has these machines and you get together to use them? Because you told us that yours still function. So How does it work? You get together and all use it?
So there is a international group, anybody can join, called Crypto Collectors. That's what we call ourselves. And it was started by some people in Great Britain, in England, which is where Bletchley Park, where they did all the cracking of the Enigmas back in World War II. They have a museum there at Bletchley. And they began this group along with a few other Americans, mostly amateur radio operators is how they got started. They had a passion for communication. They began that group a good 25 or more years ago. And so they meet once a year. They bring their devices together. Once a year here in the United States. They also meet in Germany. So the past 2 years, because of COVID, there's been a problem where these gatherings couldn't happen. But usually in June or July of each year in Germany, in Friedrichshafen, which is where Germany and Switzerland come together on the border, there's a very large amateur radio gathering, week-long gathering. And these folks will bring their Enigma machines and all the other things there to Germany and put on a big display where you can go see them. The NSA here, once every other year, they do a symposium for cryptography, and they encourage people to bring their devices and set them up for books and things. So yeah, at least once or twice a year, although again, the last 2 years because of COVID, everything's been canceled. We do have gatherings where people get together and bring their machines, and it's fun because they still work. And if you have two Enigma machines, you can use one to create a message, and then you walk over to the other one and decipher the message, which is kind of fun. Same thing with the Russians had a machine called the Fialka, which that's that thing right here. You can barely see the edge of it. There are fewer of them than there are Enigmas. There's only, of the Enigmas, there's maybe 350, we think, that are still survive. Of the Fialkas, there's maybe 100 or less. The Russians were very careful to destroy them, but a few have survived, and they work, and you can create messages same way and send and receive them. It's kind of fun to work on. This device up here is a NEMA, N-E-M-A. It's from Switzerland. There's about 400 of them roughly that are around. They work together. Now, these devices, the NEMA, the Enigma, and the Fialka will not talk to each other. They're different devices. But yeah, they work, and it's fun to do. Now, with my collection, I take it around and show it to places. I give talks in schools, universities. Yeah. What I have found is so many of them are locked up in museums. And unless you go to the museum, you don't know they're there. So I bring the Enigma to the schools and to the colleges and universities to do talks on them. And I encourage people to put your fingers on it, to make it work, to play with it. They are machines and they need to be used. If they're just sitting under glass in a museum, they eventually will lock up, they'll freeze because they're mechanical and you need to keep exercising it in order to keep it working. So, yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we are getting close to the end, but we still have one more question. Marcos, please.
Well, I think you can ask the question, Thais. Feel free. The last question.
Okay. We have one last question here. With the evaluation of quantum computer, are we at the risk of suffering a collapse in security as a whole? Is there any plan B for us?
So the thing with quantum, it's a fun buzzword. It's kind of like zero trust or AI or all these, everybody's worried about quantum. I would first say, don't worry about it. Not yet. It's still too far down the road. IBM and other companies have developed some prototype quantum computing machines. But here, the thing with them is it's speed. It's not that they're able to do anything that a current computer can't do. It's just that it can do it faster. And so any encryption algorithm can be cracked. We understand that. It's just a math equation. And so you find something mathematical that's hard. In other words, going one way through the formula is easy, coming backwards is difficult. That makes a really good algorithm. Well, coming backwards can be done if you have enough computing power. And so what quantum does is it just gives you more computing power. On the other hand, you can use quantum encryption going the other way in creating math algorithms that are so large, key sets that are so big, that it makes it even harder for a quantum computer to crack it. It also introduces some interesting ideas about encryption algorithms. If you believe in entanglement and some of the other weird physics that we're beginning to understand with beyond quantum computing, just quantum physics, that you can have two photons that might be miles apart from each other, but they're entangled. If that really works, if that's really something there, imagine using that as a communications mechanism. So now we might wind up even having perfect uncrackable communications because we're manipulating at the atomic level stuff we barely understand today, but could become kind of like if you go back 100 years, the idea of talking over a fiber optic cable, nobody would have understood that. It made no sense, right? Today we do it all the time. 100 years from now, talking over two photons that are quantumly connected to each other might be very normal. So I would say don't worry about it. As technology continues to get better, encryption will get better and communications will get better. So I think that a lot of what we see out there where people are worried about, what will security be like as quantum computing comes along, I don't think that's... The big question is in math theory, mathematical theory, we understand that factoring large numbers into their primes is a very, very hard thing to do. If somebody could figure out how to do that easily, you'd be a big hero. That would shake cryptography because so much of cryptography is based on that bit of math. And that has nothing to do with quantum. That has to do with number theory. And so if you really want to shake up cryptographic world, solve that math problem. And that'll scare people a lot more than quantum. But I'll leave that up to some young mathematician to figure out how to do that.
Right. No more questions? Yes, I think we have get to the end. So we spent 10 more minutes than we were expect. And it was really great to have this talk today, especially to talk about the role that we need to be aware we play in this game. So it's very important for us to talk about it and understand that we have important roles and we need to be aware and concerned
Absolutely.
about all the situations. It's not a how you say it's an adult game, and you need to be prepared to deal with that.
That's
But
right.
more than that, was really incredible history. I again would like to thank you very much, Marcos, to be part of our Pirando. It's our freaking out webinars we do every month. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you were the first international person to be with us. So it was really cool. It was a very interesting moment for us. And thank you very much. So
Well,
we
thank you.
really,
Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity. It's always fun to meet new people and kind of talk about my passion with these things. So let me know if you have my contact information. So if anybody has any further questions, just let me know. Be happy to answer.
yes, we will circulate it with everybody, and it will be great to have you in the next moment to talk about enigmas and other subjects that you really we are all curious here. It would be great to have another talk in the future.
You know what would also be fun, since you have those devices behind you, is maybe live. I could encrypt a message here and you can decrypt it on yours, but we'd have to practice a little bit to see if.
Yes, yes, we need to train it before, but it would
Yeah,
be really fun, you know?
that would be kind of fun. Yep. All right,
Yes.
very good. Well,
I,
thank you again.
I will create a message and send to you, and then you try to decrypt.
Exactly.
That's great. All right, so thank you everybody for being part of our incredible event today. Marcos, thank you again. If you need something from us from Latin America, Brazil, you have friends here, please.
Thank you
The
very
same.
much.
We are open to receive anything that you need. We can support you. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks again, and be safe and secure, everybody. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye
Okay,
bye.
bye bye, everybody. Thank you, Thais. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.